Please state your full name for the record.
Theodore Robert Bundy.
Theodore Robert Bundy, or more well known as Ted Bundy, was a well-educated, promising, charming man who seemed like he couldn't kill a person in his life. He was an intelligent lawyer who was also a notorious serial killer. Ted Bundy committed extremely vigorous crimes which made him a famous and well-recorded serial killer. He murdered around 30 women in a span of 2 years, and when asked if he killed 36 people, he reportedly replied, "I don't judge you to that, and you'll have it." So in reality, we don't really know how many women he did kill in the span of those 2 years. There are 4 different types of serial killers: visionary, mission-oriented, hedonistic, and finally power and control-oriented. Power and control is what Ted Bundy was classified as. They use sexual assault as a tool to exert power over their victims. This type is the most likely to rape their victims while killing them, as well as they are most likely to come back and have sex with their corpses because the act of rape, even after the victim is dead, proves they have absolute control and domination over their victims. There were some markings found in some trees in Utah that stated Ted Bundy, and Barry Bradley of Stampede Court stated, "I feel many of them are copycats, but I think 1 or 2 may have been done by Bundy." As for mental issues, he had antisocial personality disorder, sadistic personality disorder, is a narcissist, and has paranoid personality disorder. He was also diagnosed by a psychologist that he is a psychopath. Antisocial personality disorder is when a person has a long-term pattern in pulsating, exploring, or violating the rights of others. Sadistic personality disorder is when an individual possesses a display of recurrent, cruel behavior and aggression. Narcissistic personality disorder is when a person has an unreasonably high sense of their own importance. Paranoid personality disorder is a pattern of distrust and suspicion of others without adequate reason to be suspicious. And lastly, a psychopath is an individual who manifests immoral or antisocial behavior, shows lack of ability, love, or establishment, meaningful personal relationships, expresses extreme egocentricity. Bundy was a seemingly normal boy throughout his life, despite being the product of incest, not knowing his sister was his mother until quite late in his life. This was one of the first things to have an effect on Bundy's mental health. He was abused psychologically and physically by his grandfather, but later on grew to have a neutral relationship with him. His relationship with his mother was strangely wholesome. Although he did feel resentment towards her, he said that she always felt like a mother to him. Ted Bundy's mother never expected him to be the way he was.
His mother, Louise, says she still can't figure out what went wrong. In an interview with a Seattle television station yesterday, she expressed confusion at how a fun-loving and caring son could turn into a ruthless killer.
There's nothing in his background that can tell us what triggered all of this. In fact, up until Saturday, I didn't believe any of it.
Mrs. Bundy always believed her son was innocent, and when he confessed to the killings before his death, she was shocked.
We were angry for a while yesterday, even this morning, that he never confided in us. Of course, if he had, what would we have done then? You don't usually go around telling your mom that you've been doing these kinds of things. That I understand, but for 13 years, he's sworn up and down, backwards and forwards, that he was innocent. And then all of a sudden, we believed him, we wanted to believe him. He's still our son, no matter what he's done, and we love him very much.
A serial killer. He possessed some early warning signs as a kid, where he was abused as a child. He had a dysfunctional family and is a voyeur. Bundy was not only perverted in his killings, but also in his fantasies, such as necrophilia.
To continue on to what Catherine was saying, Bundy is a known necrophiliac. He would often remove victims' heads and ejaculate into the remains. Bundy is said to have decapitated 12 victims and kept their heads as mementos. Bundy would then proceed to hide the bodies in remote locations, only to later on unhide them or recover them from the burial site to engage in fornication with the remains for, if not days, then weeks. This cycle would continue with multiple victims until the bodies would decompose by either animal intervention, meaning the animals ate at them, or the environment decomposed the victims naturally. In addition to the rape and murder of the victims, Bundy often sodomized his victims. In other words, he had anal sex with them, if not direct then indirectly, by shoving foreign objects into their anus. Bundy had another signature, however. He would often bite off victims' nipples. In addition to being a rapist and necrophiliac, Ted Bundy was also a pedophile. Bundy molested his 10-year-old stepdaughter. She writes about this in her book, however, she is not thought to be his only young victim, because Bundy targeted young women that had very submissive traits. Some of these traits included, but were not limited to, their trustful nature, as well as their naivety, and their unwillingness to speak up about something that they find unjust, because their feelings are often shut down or shrugged off as immature. Bundy often blames pornography for his misdeeds.
That hardcore pornography and the doorway to it, softcore pornography, is doing untold damage to other people and causing other women to be abused and killed the way you did others.
Listen, I'm no social scientist, and I haven't done a survey. I mean, I don't pretend that I know what John Q. Citizen thinks about this. But I've lived in prison for a long time now. And I've met a lot of men who were motivated to commit violence just like me. And without exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography, without question, without exception, deeply influenced and consumed by an addiction to pornography. There's no question about it. The FBI's own study on serial homicide shows that the most common interest among serial killers is pornography.
More than a decade of denials, he confessed to 30 murders in several states, including California, Colorado, Florida, Idaho, Oregon, Utah, and Washington. Although people who knew him said he was very charismatic, intelligent, and personable, he often used his charm in order to pick up victims. He also used a cast in order to appear less threatening and lure women into a false sense of security to make them more vulnerable to his tactics. Bundy seems to be very proud of his actions. He has no remorse. He was sentenced to 3 death sentences and 15 years in prison. He escaped June 7th, 1977 to June 13th, 1977, and again in December of 1977 on the 30th to February 15th, 1978. His girlfriend at the time, Elizabeth Kendall, was in a very toxic and abusive relationship. Bundy was often manipulative and used his charm in order to essentially brainwash her. He would lock her outside and then act as though nothing happened and act like a very sweet, caring, and compassionate person. This cycle of abuse dragged on for 6 years until she finally turned him in, or rather gave police his name after she suspected very strange behavior revolving around the deaths of the young girls.
Ted Bundy, even in death, stirred hatred.
We were singing, bye.
unprecedented crowd of hundreds started gathering before dawn. It took on a macabre circus-like atmosphere. Is this what you expected to find when you come out here? Folks dancing and singing?
Yeah, why not?
But a handful of anti-death penalty protesters.
It sounds more like vengeance to me than justice.
At one point, the celebration got out of hand. One man was arrested for shooting off fireworks. Until the very last moment, no one could be sure Bundy didn't have a last trick up his sleeve, a legal technicality. But in the death chamber, Bundy was uttering his final words.
All he said is, "I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." That was Ted Bundy's last statement.
His eyes looked like he was almost a child, and his mother caught him doing something wrong. It was a combination of just being sorry and knowing that it was the end. It was the end of the line.
So it ended for Ted Bundy. 10 years, 28 confessions, millions in Florida's legal battle to end his life. Warren Ellie, Pulse 13, Florida State Prison.
Perverted man targeted young, vulnerable women that had no chance of fighting a grown 40-year-old man. It's truly sickening that he targeted young women as young as 12 years old. It is said that he felt as though they were clean because they were untouched. He, however, had a daughter that was born October 24th, 1982, while he was in prison. He later went on to be executed January 24th, 1989. His final words, "Give my love to my friends and family." Truly, after murdering over 36 women, this man had no remorse for any of it.
Ted Bundy was a notorious serial killer who was charged with and convicted of a series of murders in the 1970s. His trial was highly publicized and attracted significant media attention. The first trial in which Ted Bundy was charged was held in 1979 in Miami, Florida, where he was charged with the murder of 2 young women. During the trial, the prosecution presented evidence linking Bundy to the crimes, including witness testimony and physical evidence found at the crime scenes. Despite the evidence against him, Bundy maintained his innocence and attempted to cast doubt on the prosecution's case. However, the jury found him guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to death. Bundy was later tried and convicted in other states for additional murders. In all his trials, he was represented by defense attorneys, and he was found guilty on multiple counts. He was eventually executed by electric chair in 1989. He insisted on his innocence and made an effort to discredit the prosecution's case by contesting the reliability of the witness and the evidence. For an example, Bundy tried to argue that the physical evidence linking him to the crimes, such as hairs and fibers found at the crime scenes, could have been planted by the police or contaminated. He also tried to discredit the witness testimony by pointing out inconsistencies in the accounts of the witnesses and suggesting that they might have been influenced by media coverage of the case. In subsequent trials in other states, Bundy was represented by defense attorneys who was used similar tactics in attempt to challenge the prosecution's case and create reasonable doubt. However, these efforts were ultimately unsuccessful, and Bundy was found guilty on multiple counts in which of these trials as well. Despite his denials, the evidence against Bundy was strong, and the prosecution presented a compelling case against him at each of his trials. The jury found him guilty in each case, and he was eventually sentenced to death for his crimes. The trial and its subsequent media coverage had a number of impacts on society. One significant impact was that it brought attention to the issue of serial killers and predatory violence. The case was also bringing awareness about the importance of DNA evidence in the criminal investigations.